"Mom, you don't understand me," said the 18-year-old guy. But if you would just go to work," said his mother. "And those friends of yours, if they were really friends, they would be telling you not to use marijuana rather than selling you the stuff." "Mom," said her son, "they are my friends, and they understand me better than you ever will." And so the conversation goes. Mom feeling more sad, angry, powerless, and guilty every day. And her son feeling misunderstood, afraid, confused. There's a gap between them that seems to be unbridgeable. And the gaps between us aren't just in our homes. The gaps I hear between the perspectives of even people of great goodwill in our public life and in our church have never been wider in my lived experience. And sometimes words, rather than helping to narrow those gaps, make them even wider. We shout about guns, immigration, God, and whose lives matter. And every day more people are marginalized. No one feels understood, and many of us are afraid. And yet, most of us would like things to be different. Most of us would like to find a new way, and sometimes we don't know how. Today is Pentecost. Today in our Acts reading, we heard about fire and a driving wind. It's important to mention that the Acts author uses as the context of Pentecost an ancient Jewish feast in which the people harvested their first grains, loaded them up onto caravans, decorated those with greenery and flowers, and then they danced all the way into Jerusalem, celebrating their God, who many years before had laid God's own law among their ancestors, a law that allowed those people a completely new way forward. In the Acts story itself, in the Acts story of Pentecost, the driving wind and the fire find the first broken and frightened Christians, bathing them in the Spirit, showing them a completely new way forward. It was amazing. Many people there present were able to understand one another for the very first time. Fast forward to the present. Today is Pentecost. As a community, we gather in sure and certain expectation of being bathed in that same wind and fire as those first Christians. That is truly amazing. Feel that wind in your hair as you sit with your son or your daughter, or maybe your mother or your father, for the first time in perhaps a very long while. If you listen, really listen, could it be that the love that goes deeper than any division might bubble up in a way that you couldn't have imagined? Feel the wind in your hair as you start to think about the possibility of a new way forward, either for yourself, maybe for your family, or how about for all of us? a new way forward for all of us, in which we leave no one behind. Bathed in the Spirit, we know that we can talk with one another. There is a way for us to understand one another. The very column of fire that preceded the Israelites in the desert so many years ago rests on your head right now, today, as you think about facing the person with whom you are the most at odds. The ancient Christians, the first ones, used the wind and flame to build the church and to reflect on what it meant to be holy in the world. They created a path that's been followed in almost every corner of our globe by millions of people for 2,000 years. In the ancient story, people could suddenly understand one another. That didn't mean that all of their sources of division and conflict went away. On the contrary, if we look just a few verses on in our Acts story, we see that some of the people looking at those disciples thought they were drunk, whereas others were able to understand one another for the first time. Their sources of conflict and division didn't go away, and ours probably won't either. And yet, now as then, the fire and the wind are more. Today is Pentecost. The ever-new presence of God surrounds us in the very context of our fear and hiding, and still again calls us to remember. The power of the Spirit of the resurrected Christ has not diminished. The immense love that God showers in abundance in wind and flame has not changed. And the capacity of God to speak a word from beyond, but right in our complicated and frightened reality, is still real. Today is Pentecost. Feel the wind in your hair.